The sky over Reedridge Colony turned a strange green color just before the storm hit. Most people thought it was just bad weather coming in from the eastern hills. Nobody expected a ship to fall out of that sky. It came down fast, trailing black smoke, and hit the rocky field half a mile from the edge of town. The sound of the crash rolled through Reedridge like thunder, rattling windows and sending dogs into a barking fit. A few workers in the grain silo ran outside to look, but the smoke and dust made it hard to see anything clearly. After a moment, most of them shrugged and went back to work. Ships did not usually crash near a colony this small and this far from any major trade route. They figured it was some kind of freak accident, maybe a supply drone gone wrong, and that someone from the city would come sort it out eventually. They had no idea what was crawling out of that wreckage. Inside the broken ship, a girl named Nima was screaming, though no sound came out anymore. Her throat was raw from crying already. She had pulled her mother free of the twisted metal and scorched wiring with her own small hands, dragging her across the shaking floor while sparks rained down around them. The ship groaned like a dying animal, metal folding in on itself, and Nima did not stop pulling until they were both outside on the cold ground, away from the flames that were starting to climb up the hull. Nima was young, even by the standards of her own people, the Doran. Her skin was a pale blue-gray, and thin ridges ran down the sides of her neck, pulsing now with fear instead of their usual calm rhythm. She knelt beside her mother, Sela, whose chest barely rose and fell. Dark fluid, almost black in the dim light, soaked through Sela's clothing from a wound Nima could not identify. Only C was very bad. They had been running for weeks. Their homeworld had fallen into war, block by block, city by city, until there was no home left to speak of. Sela had gotten them onto a transport out, one of the last off-world, carrying nothing but a bag of supplies and whatever hope was left. The trip had been long and dangerous, jumping from system to system, hiding from patrols that did not care whether refugees lived or died. This crash was supposed to be the end of the danger. Instead, it might be the end of everything. Nima did not know this world. She did not know its language beyond a few words Sela had drilled into her before the crash, words meant for emergencies. She did not know its people, its customs, or whether they would help a stranded alien child and her dying mother, or simply turn away. But she knew one thing. If she did nothing, her mother would die. So she ran. She left the wreck behind her, its smoke curling into the darkening sky, and ran toward the distant lights of Reedridge, her bare feet slipping on the loose rocks. Every breath burned in her chest. Twice she fell and scraped her hands on the stones, but she pushed herself back up both times without slowing down. Her mother's face kept flashing in her mind, pale and still, and it was enough to keep her legs moving even when her body wanted to stop. By the time she reached the edge of town, her lungs felt like they were on fire. The streets were mostly empty, people already indoors ahead of the coming storm. She grabbed the first person she saw, an older woman carrying groceries, and tried to speak, but the words would not come out right. The woman flinched back in shock and fear at the sight of her, dropped her bags, and hurried away without a word. Nima did not chase her. She could not blame her. She looked strange here, and she knew it. But she also could not stop. She ran further into the town, panic rising with every step, searching for anyone who might understand, anyone who might not run from her the way the woman had. Lights were coming on in the windows around her as the storm clouds rolled closer, throwing long shadows across the dirt road. Somewhere behind her, thunder cracked over the hills, and she flinched but kept moving. Then she saw him. A tall man was standing outside a repair shop at the edge of the main road, wiping grease off his hands with a rag, watching the storm clouds build with a tired, thoughtful look on his face. He wore old, worn clothes and had the kind of weathered face that told a hard story, though Nima had no way of knowing what that story was. She did not think. She just ran straight at him, faster than she thought her legs could carry her, and grabbed his sleeve with both hands before he even had time to react. He turned sharply, startled, and looked down at her. Up close, she could see the surprise in his eyes at what he was looking at, an alien child, blue-gray skin streaked with dust and tears, hands trembling as they held onto his arm. But there was something else in his eyes too. Not fear, not disgust, just a sharp, quiet attention, as if he were already trying to figure out what was wrong. Nima pulled in a shaking breath and forced out the only words she had been taught for exactly this kind of moment. The words Sela had made her practice again and again before the crash, just in case. Please save my mom. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pointed back the way she had come, toward the smoke rising faintly against the darkening sky, toward the wreck where her mother lay dying in the dirt. The man's face changed instantly. Whatever tiredness had been there before vanished, replaced by something sharp and focused. He dropped the rag in his hand and crouched down slightly to her level. Where? He said, his voice calm but urgent. Show me. Nima grabbed his hand and pulled, already running back toward the crash site, praying with everything she had that she had found the right person in time. Garrick had not run this fast in years. His knees ached with every step, but he pushed through it, following the small alien girl as she led him off the road and across the rocky field toward the smoking wreck. Behind them, the storm was closing in fast, the wind picking up and throwing dust into the air. When they reached the crash site, Garrick stopped for half a second, taking it in. The ship was small, maybe built for short trips, and now it was a crumpled mess of metal and shattered glass, still smoking from a fire that had mostly burned itself out. Lying a few feet from the wreck was the source of the girl's panic, a second alien, older, larger, and clearly badly hurt. Garrick did not waste time asking questions. He moved straight to the injured alien and dropped to his knees beside her, already scanning for the worst of the damage. Years of old training kicked in without him even thinking about it. Muscle memory built from a different life, a harder one, back when he used to patch up soldiers in the middle of chaos far worse than this. The alien woman, who he would soon learn was named Sela, had a deep wound along her side, dark fluid soaking through torn fabric. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Garrick pressed 2 fingers gently near her neck, searching for anything that might resemble a pulse point, and found a faint, fast fluttering beneath the skin. She's fading, he muttered to himself. Need to move her now. The girl, still gripping his sleeve, said something rapid in her own language before catching herself and switching back to broken trade tongue. Please, help. She dying. I heard you the first time, Garrick said, not unkindly. He looked around quickly. His workshop was the closest clean shelter, only a few minutes away if he moved fast, and it had supplies he had not touched in years but never got rid of, old habits from an old life. The colony's real clinic was hours out by shuttle, and with the storm rolling in, that shuttle was not flying tonight. It was him or nobody. Help me lift her, he said, though he doubted the small girl could do much. Still, having her hold Sela's head steady while he got his arms under her was better than nothing. Carefully, gritting his teeth against the strain in his back, Garrick lifted Sela off the ground. She was heavier than she looked, her frame denser than a human's despite the similar size. But he managed, cradling her against his chest as he began the walk back toward town. Talk to her, he told the girl as they moved. Keep her hearing your voice. Might help. The girl did not need to be told twice. She stayed close by his side the whole way, speaking softly to her mother in their own language, her voice trembling but steady enough to be useful. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall just as they reached the edge of town. Garrick's workshop was a converted garage, cluttered with tools, spare parts, and the smell of old oil. He kicked the door shut behind them once they were inside, laid Sela down carefully on the long workbench he cleared with one sweep of his arm, and immediately went for the metal case tucked under a shelf in the back corner. He had not opened that case in a long time. Inside were the tools of his old trade, military-grade medical supplies, most of them expired by regulation standards, but still functional if you knew what you were doing. Pressure bandages, a basic diagnostic scanner, suture kits, cauterizing tools. He had kept the case out of habit more than anything, never expecting to need it again. He was wrong about that. What's your name? He asked the girl while he worked, trying to keep her talking, keep her calm, keep himself calm too if he was honest. Nima, she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. My mother, Sela. All right, Nima. I'm Garrick. I need you to help me. Can you do that? She nodded quickly, desperate to be useful. Garrick ran the small diagnostic scanner over Sela's body, watching the readout with a frown. The device was built for humans, and half the readings coming back made little sense for whatever internal structure Sela actually had. Heart rate, if that number even meant anything here, was too fast. Blood pressure, if that was even blood in the way he understood it, was dropping. I need to know some things, he said, crouching to Nima's eye level despite the urgency screaming in his chest to hurry. Where is her heart? Or hearts, if she's got more than one? Show me. Nima blinked, confused for a second, then pointed with a shaking hand to two spots on Sella's chest, higher up than a human heart would sit, spaced apart on either side. 2. Garrick said under his breath. All right, good to know. What color blood? He asked next, gesturing at the dark stains spreading across Sella's side. Blue, Nima said. When hurt. When bad, get darker. Like now. Garrick nodded slowly, processing that. Dark blood usually meant deoxygenation in human terms, but he had no idea if that same logic applied here. Still, darker was clearly a bad sign to Nima, and that told him enough. He needed to slow the bleeding and get oxygen moving properly, whatever form that took for Adoran. He looked at the wound again, a deep puncture, likely from a piece of metal debris during the crash. Human training told him to apply pressure, stop the bleeding, prevent shock. Whether or not shock worked the same way for Sella's body, he had no way of knowing for certain. But the core principles of trauma, stopping blood loss, keeping the body stable, buying time, those had to translate somehow. Biology this far out among the stars might vary wildly in the details, but pain, injury, and death seemed to be a language every living thing understood. All right, Garrick said quietly, mostly to himself, rolling up his sleeves as thunder cracked outside and the rain began hammering against the roof. Let's see what we can do. The workshop had never seen this kind of work before. Garrick had used the space for engine repairs, welding jobs, and the occasional favor for a neighbor's broken machinery. Now the workbench held something far more delicate than any engine, a living creature from another world, fighting to stay alive under his hands. He worked fast but careful, cutting away the torn fabric around Sella's wound to get a clear look at the damage. The injury was deep, a jagged tear from broken metal during the crash, and dark blue fluid kept welling up no matter how much pressure he applied. He grabbed a pressure bandage from his kit, one meant for human bodies, and pressed it firmly against the wound, holding it there with steady hands while his mind raced through every option available to him. Nima, he said without looking up, hold this light steady for me. Right here. Nima grabbed the small work lamp from the bench and aimed it exactly where he pointed, her hands shaking slightly, but her focus unbroken. She had stopped crying somewhere along the walk back to the workshop, her fear folding itself into something quieter and more useful, a kind of grim determination that surprised even Garrick a little. You're doing good, he told her, glancing up just long enough to give her a small nod. Keep that light there. She nodded back, swallowing hard, and did not look away from her mother's face. Garrick returned his attention to the wound, checking the flow of blood. It was slowing, but not fast enough. He needed to close it properly, and for that, he needed the wound clean and the bleeding controlled at the source. He reached for a small vial of coagulant gel, a standard tool from his medic days meant to speed up clotting in human wounds. It was a gamble, using something built for human blood on whatever ran through Sella's veins, but he was out of better options. He applied a small amount to the edge of the wound and watched closely. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sella's whole body tensed, and a hissing sound came from deep in her throat, somewhere between pain and reaction. The skin around the wound turned a strange shade of purple, and the flow of blood, instead of slowing, seemed to speed up. That's wrong, Garrick muttered, already reaching for a cloth to wipe the gel away as fast as he could. That's not supposed to happen. Nima's ridges along her neck flared, a sign of alarm Garrick did not yet understand but recognized instinctively as bad. What did you do? She said, panic creeping back into her voice. Made a mistake, Garrick admitted grimly, cleaning the area as fast as he could without causing more damage. Her body doesn't like human coagulant. Noted. Won't do that again. He forced himself to slow down, just slightly, just enough to think clearly instead of reacting on instinct built for a different species. Instinct had gotten him this far, but instinct alone was not going to save Sella. He needed to actually think. He set the gel aside and grabbed a fresh pressure bandage instead, going back to basics, direct pressure and elevation, things that were universal to almost any circulatory system he had ever heard of. He pressed the bandage firmly against the wound and held it there, counting the seconds in his head, watching Sella's face for any sign of change. Slowly, gradually, the bleeding began to slow on its own, the natural response of Sella's body finally starting to work now that Garrick had stopped interfering with chemicals that clearly did not belong. He kept the pressure steady, ignoring the ache building in his arms, focused entirely on the rhythm of Sella's shallow, uneven breaths. His mind drifted, just for a moment, to another place, another time. A war-torn medical tent, the sound of gunfire in the distance, and a young soldier bleeding out under his hands while he worked with nothing but a field kit and desperation. He had lost that soldier. He remembered every second of it. The moment the young man's eyes went still, the moment Garrick's hands stopped being enough. He was not losing this one. "Come on," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "Come on, stay with me." Minutes passed, though it felt far longer. The storm outside grew louder, rain hammering against the workshop roof, wind rattling the old metal walls. Nima stayed frozen in place, holding the light steady, watching Garrick's hands move with a kind of desperate hope she could not put into words. Finally, the bleeding slowed to a trickle, then stopped almost entirely. Garrick carefully checked the bandage, satisfied it was holding, and moved the scanner over Sella's body again. The readings were still far from good, but they were better. Her breathing had steadied slightly, no longer the shallow gasping from before. Whatever passed for her pulse in Dorn biology had slowed from its dangerous, frantic pace into something closer to stable. Garrick let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and sat back slightly, running a hand across his face. "She's not out of danger," he said honestly, looking at Nima. "But she's not dying right now. That's something." Nima's whole body seemed to sag with relief, the tension leaving her shoulders all at once. She set the light down carefully and reached out, gently touching her mother's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Garrick with wide, tired eyes. "Thank you." Garrick just nodded, not trusting his voice for a second. He looked down at Sella, still unconscious but breathing steadier now, and felt the old, familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders, the same weight he had carried years ago and thought he had left behind for good. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Whatever came next, help was not arriving tonight. It was just him, a frightened alien girl, and her fragile, fighting mother, alone against whatever the night still had in store. Word travels fast in a small town, even during a storm. By the time Garrick had Sella stable enough to breathe easy for a few minutes, a crowd had already started gathering outside his workshop. He heard them before he saw them, voices raised over the sound of the rain, boots splashing through the mud, someone banging hard on the metal door. "Garrick, you in there? Heard you dragged something out of that crash." He exchanged a look with Nima, who had gone stiff with fear the moment the voices reached her ears. Her hand tightened around her mother's fingers, and her neck ridges flared bright with alarm. "Stay here," Garrick told her firmly. "Stay with her. I'll handle this." He walked to the door and opened it just enough to block the view behind him, stepping half outside into the rain. A dozen or so people stood there, soaked and uneasy, some carrying farm tools that could pass for weapons if someone was in the mood to be afraid, and by the looks on their faces, plenty of them were. At the front of the group stood Denner, a broad-shouldered man who ran the grain co-op and liked to think of himself as the closest thing Reedridge had to a leader. His eyes were hard, suspicious, darting past Garrick toward the dim light inside the workshop. "We heard a ship crashed out past the fields," Denner said. "And now folks are saying you brought something back with you. Something not human. Her name is Sella," Garrick said evenly. "And her daughter, Nima. Refugees. Their ship went down. The mother's hurt bad. I'm doing what I can for her." A murmur ran through the crowd, uneasy and full of fear dressed up as caution. "You don't know what that thing is," someone called out from the back. "Could be dangerous. Could be part of an invasion for all we know." "She's unconscious and bleeding on my workbench," Garrick said, his voice sharpening just slightly. "Doesn't look real dangerous from where I'm standing." Denner stepped closer, lowering his voice, though it still carried plenty of warning. "You know how this looks, Garrick. Strange ship falls out of the sky, and suddenly you've got aliens hiding in your shop. People are scared. They want to see for themselves what's going on. Before Garrick could answer, the door behind him creaked further open. He turned, ready to tell Nima to get back, but stopped when he saw the look on her face. She was scared, that much was obvious, her whole small body trembling in the doorway. But she stepped forward anyway, placing herself firmly between the crowd and the workshop, between them and her mother. "Please," she said, her voice shaking but clear, forcing out every word of trade tongue she knew. "We not hurt you. We running. War took our home. My mother only want safe place. Please don't hurt her." The crowd went quiet for a moment, taken aback by the sight of the girl, small and clearly terrified, standing her ground anyway to protect her mother. Dinner's expression flickered, something uncertain passing behind his eyes, but he did not step back. "That doesn't mean we can just trust her," he said, though his voice had lost a little of its edge. "You don't have to trust her," Garrick said, stepping fully outside now, letting the door close most of the way behind him to keep Nima and Sela out of sight and out of danger. "But you're not laying a hand on either of them. Not tonight. Not while I'm standing here. And who put you in charge of deciding that?" Dinner shot back, though there was less heat in it now than before. Garrick met his eyes steadily. "I spent years patching up people in the middle of wars that had nothing to do with me. People who looked nothing like the folks I grew up with, people some might have said didn't deserve saving. I never once asked what side someone was on before I stopped their bleeding. I'm not about to start now, over a scared kid and her dying mother." The rain kept falling, hammering down around them, but nobody moved for a long moment. Garrick could see the crowd wavering, the fear in their eyes tangled up with something else now, doubt, maybe even a little shame. "She's just a kid, Dinner," said an older woman near the back, her voice quiet but firm. "Look at her. She's terrified." Dinner glanced at Nemo again, still standing bravely in the doorway despite her shaking hands, and something in his hard expression finally cracked. He let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "All right," he said finally. "All right. Nobody's doing anything tonight. Storm's bad anyway. We'll let the authorities sort it out proper once the shuttle can fly again." He turned to the crowd. "Everybody back home. Nothing more to see here tonight." The group began to disperse, slowly, some throwing uncertain glances back at the workshop as they went, but none of them lingering. Dinner stayed a moment longer, studying Garrick with an expression that was hard to read. "You'd better be right about this," he said quietly. "I usually am," Garrick replied, though there was no arrogance in it, just tired honesty. Dinner gave a short nod and finally turned, disappearing into the rain after the others. Garrick watched them go until the street was empty again, then stepped back inside, closing the door firmly behind him and letting out a long breath. Nima was still standing where she had been, staring up at him with wide eyes. "They not hurt us," she said, half question, half disbelief. "Not tonight," Garrick said, walking past her to check on Sela again. "And I intend to keep it that way." Nima followed him back to the workbench, her small hand slipping into his sleeve again, not out of fear this time, but something closer to trust. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the workshop, for now, there was a fragile kind of peace. The storm did not let up as the night wore on. Rain hammered the workshop roof in steady waves, and every so often a crack of thunder rolled close enough to rattle the tools hanging on the walls. Garrick kept a small lamp burning low near the workbench, just enough light to check on Sela without disturbing her rest. He had not slept, and did not plan to. Every hour, he ran the scanner over her again, checking numbers that still did not fully make sense to him, but were at least trending in a direction he could call good. Her breathing stayed steady. The wound had stopped bleeding entirely, held closed now with careful stitches he had placed with more patience than he thought his tired hands still had. Around midnight, disaster nearly struck again. Garrick noticed it first as a change in Sela's breathing, quicker, shallower, and when he pressed the back of his hand lightly against her forehead, the heat radiating off her skin startled him. He grabbed the scanner again, watching the readout climb steadily upward. "Fever," he muttered, already moving to grab supplies. "Didn't expect that." Nima, who had drifted into an exhausted half-sleep in the corner chair, jolted awake at the tension in his voice. "What's wrong? Is she?" "She's not dying," Garrick said quickly, cutting off the panic before it could fully take hold. "But something's reacting badly. I used an antiseptic on the stitches earlier. Might not agree with her the way it does with a human." He worked fast, wiping away the antiseptic as thoroughly as he could and replacing it with a simple saline solution instead, something far more universal and far less likely to cause an unexpected reaction. He kept a close eye on the fever for the next half hour, relief slowly creeping back into his chest as the numbers on the scanner began to level off and then, gradually, decline. "There," he said quietly, mostly to reassure himself as much as Nima. "That's better." Nima let out a shaky breath. She had moved to stand close beside him during the scare, watching every move he made with wide, unblinking eyes. Now that the danger had passed again, her shoulders sagged, and for the first time that night, Garrick saw something in her face that was not pure fear. It looked closer to exhaustion, the kind that came from holding fear in for too long. "You should rest," he told her gently. "I've got this." She shook her head immediately. "Not yet. She's my mother. I stay." Garrick did not argue further. He understood that kind of stubbornness better than most. They sat together in silence for a while after that, the storm still raging outside, the only sounds inside the workshop being Sella's steady breathing and the occasional creak of the old building shifting in the wind. Eventually, Nima spoke again, quieter this time, almost to herself. "We had a home," she said. "Before. It was blue, like the sky here, but with 2 moons instead of 1. My father used to take me outside at night to watch them rise together." Garrick glanced at her but stayed quiet, letting her continue if she wanted to. "The war came fast," she went on. "Faster than anyone thought it would. My mother said we had to leave, that staying meant dying. My father stayed behind to help others get out. He said he would follow soon." She paused, her small hands twisting together in her lap. "He never came." Garrick felt something tighten in his chest, an old, familiar ache he recognized all too well. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and he meant it. Nima looked up at him, curiosity breaking briefly through her grief. "Did you lose someone too? In your war?" Garrick was quiet for a long moment, staring at the worn tools scattered across his workbench, remembering things he had not spoken aloud in years. "Yeah," he said finally. "A long time ago. Young soldier, barely more than a kid himself. I was working on him, trying to stop the bleeding, same as I did tonight for your mother. But I wasn't fast enough that time. I lost him." He paused, jaw tightening slightly. "Told myself after that I'd never let it happen again if I could help it. Didn't matter who it was. Didn't matter what they looked like." Nima studied him for a moment, something shifting in her expression, a kind of understanding passing silently between them. "That's why you helped us," she said softly, "even though you didn't know us." "That's why," Garrick agreed simply. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, the kind that only happens between people who have been through something hard together. Outside, the storm began to show the first small signs of weakening, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening slightly against the roof. Nima eventually leaned her head against the edge of the workbench, close to her mother, her eyes finally growing heavy despite her earlier refusal to rest. Garrick let her be, watching over both of them quietly as the night wore on, checking the scanner every so often out of habit more than necessity now. Sella's condition continued to improve steadily through the remaining hours of the night. Her fever stayed down, her breathing remained even, and the readings on the scanner, strange as they still were to him, kept trending in the right direction. By the time the first gray light of dawn began creeping through the small workshop windows, Garrick allowed himself, for the first time all night, a small measure of real relief. He looked over at Nima, asleep now with one hand still resting protectively on her mother's arm, and felt something settle quietly in his chest, something that had nothing to do with medicine or training. Whatever happened next, he thought, watching the storm finally begin to clear outside, they had made it through the night. And that, after everything, felt like enough for now. Morning came slow and quiet after the storm, the kind of stillness that only follows a long, hard night. Sunlight broke through the clouds in pale golden streaks, catching on wet rooftops and puddled streets across Ridge Ridge. Birds, silent all night, began to call again from the trees at the edge of town. Inside the workshop, Garrick was the first to notice the change in the light through the windows. He stretched stiffly, his back aching from the hours spent hunched over the workbench, and checked the scanner one more time. The readings were steady now, better than steady, actually approaching what he guessed was a healthy range for whatever Sella's baseline normally looked like. She stirred not long after, a soft groan escaping her as consciousness slowly returned. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, before settling on the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Nima, jolted from sleep by the smallest sound of movement, was instantly awake and leaning over her mother, tears springing to her eyes again, though this time they were different tears entirely. "Mama," she said, voice breaking with relief. "Mama, you're awake." Sella's gaze shifted to her daughter, confusion slowly giving way to recognition, and then to something like disbelief as she took in her surroundings, the workshop, the makeshift bandages, the strange human standing nearby watching with quiet exhaustion on his face. She said something soft in her own language, her voice weak but clear, and Nima laughed through her tears, nodding quickly. "She wants to know what happened," Nima translated, wiping at her eyes. "I told her. About the crash. About you." Sella's eyes moved to Garrick fully now, studying him carefully. After a moment, she spoke again, slower this time, testing out broken trade tongue with visible effort. "You saved me." Garrick gave a small, tired nod. "Did what I could. Your daughter's the one who found me. Wouldn't have had the chance without her." Sella looked at Nima, something deep and grateful passing between mother and daughter that needed no translation at all. Not long after, the sound of an engine reached them from outside, a shuttle finally cutting through the clearing sky. With the storm gone and communications restored, word of the crash had reached the colony's main medical outpost overnight, and a proper response team was arriving at last. Garrick stepped outside to meet them as they landed nearby, 2 medics and a colony official climbing out, already looking around cautiously at the scene. He gave them a quick rundown, the crash, the injuries, the treatment he had managed through the night, watching their expressions shift from professional caution to genuine surprise as he explained what he had done with nothing but old field supplies and improvised guesswork. "You stabilized alien trauma injuries with human-grade medical gear?" one of the medics asked, clearly impressed despite themselves. "Didn't have much choice," Garrick said simply. "Storm wasn't letting anyone else in." The medics moved quickly after that, checking on Sella with proper equipment, confirming what Garrick's makeshift efforts had already suggested. She was stable, recovering well, and expected to make a full recovery given time and proper care. The relief on Nima's face when she heard the news was almost enough to make Garrick forget how tired he was. Outside, a small crowd had gathered again, many of the same faces from the night before, though the mood was different now. Word had spread of what happened, of the girl who begged a stranger for help, of the man who spent the night fighting to save an alien's life with nothing but old training and stubborn will. Dinner was among them, arms crossed, watching the scene with an expression that had softened considerably since the previous night. When his eyes met Garrick's, he gave a short, respectful nod, one that said more than words might have. As the medics prepared to load Sella carefully onto the shuttle for proper treatment at the outpost, Nima hesitated near the doorway, looking back at Garrick one last time. She crossed the short distance between them and, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you," she said again, the same words from the night before, but they felt different now, lighter somehow. Then she added something new, a word in her own language, soft and reverent, one Garrick did not understand but felt the weight of anyway. "What's that mean?" he asked gently. Nima looked up at him, her eyes still a little glassy but bright now with something other than fear. "It means someone who gives life back. It's a big word. Not for everyone. Only for," she struggled for the right term, then simply said, "only for you. Today." Garrick did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded, giving her small shoulder a gentle pat. "Take care of your mother," he said instead. "And yourself." "I will," Nima promised. She climbed aboard the shuttle a moment later, taking one last look back at Garrick standing in the morning light before the doors closed. The engines hummed to life, and slowly, the shuttle lifted off the ground, carrying Sella and Nima away toward proper care and, eventually, whatever new future awaited them among the stars. Garrick stood there long after the shuttle had disappeared from sight, watching the clear sky where it had gone, the storm from the night before nothing now but scattered clouds drifting lazily overhead. Dinner walked up beside him after a moment, hands in his pockets. Didn't expect any of that, Dinner admitted. Alien refugees. You playing doctor all night. Whole town nearly losing its head over it. Neither did I, Garrick said honestly. You did good, though, Dinner added, a little gruffly, like the words did not come easy to him. Whatever that word she used meant, I reckon you earned it. Garrick allowed himself a small, tired smile as he turned back toward his workshop, ready finally for some real rest. It was not advanced technology or galactic authority that had saved Sela and Nima that night. It was one tired human, refusing to let fear or difference stand between him and someone who needed help. Somewhere out among the stars, in whatever new home the Doran refugees eventually found, the story of that night would travel with them, carried in a young girl's memory, a small but powerful reminder that sometimes the difference between life and death came down to nothing more than one person deciding to care.